I cannot hear you. Can you hear me?
Can't hear them.
There you go.
Yeah, can't hear the town though.
Yeah.
Okay, checking now. Okay. And Councillor Wielden, can you tell us if, just say something so see if we can hear you?
How does this sound?
We cannot.
Interesting.
I can hear you.
Yeah. Try that one. Okay. Try again. Jeff.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you very much. All right. Ain't technology wonderful? Members of council, have you any declarations of pecuniary interest? And if so, please state the general nature thereof. There are none noted. We have no delegations this evening, which brings us to our statutory public meeting moved by Councillor Rowley. Seconded by Councillor Wright. The council move into the statutory public meeting November 12, 2024 at 6:34 p.m. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion's carried. The Municipality of Brighton takes steps beyond the requirements of the Planning Act to engage the community in land use planning initiatives. The municipality also holds a statutory public meeting on the planning item and then receives a staff report with a recommendation on which council will make a decision. It is during this meeting that council depends on the community to provide input for our decision. This input may be received in advance of the statutory public meeting by sending correspondence to the clerk's office and/or by making an oral submission to council at the statutory public meeting. This will best inform council on the land use planning matter prior to council making our final decision. Recent statutory changes limit appeal rights to only the applicant and specified regulated persons. For details or other information on the new appeal process, please visit the municipal website or contact the clerk's office. We have only one item in our statutory public meeting this evening. It is with regard to a zoning bylaw amendment for Georgina Street and Hardy Lane. The applicant is OMNI. This public meeting is to address the requirements under the Planning Act for hosting a public meeting before council makes a decision and to obtain public input towards making any decision on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment application. Mr. Warren, by what method and on what date was notice of the application given?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The notice of the application was provided in accordance with the Planning Act by mail on October the 22nd of this year. All property owners within 120 meters of the subject property, and notice was also circulated to all applicable agencies as required under the Act, and there were 2 sign notices also posted on the property, one on each frontage.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. And would you please explain the purpose and reason for the subject applications before council this evening?
Absolutely. Zoning bylaw amendment Z07 2024. Purpose is to rezone the subject lands to a special urban residential zone, an R3 zone, to permit the proposed land use, namely a 256-bed long-term care facility, and to establish appropriate site-specific performance standards for those lands for the building. The balance of the site to be rezoned to a special agricultural zone slated for future development in conjunction with the future extension of Hardy Lane and Singleton Street. Currently vacant, the subject lands are within Brighton's urban area.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. Are there persons present who have questions or comments regarding the subject application?
Yes.
Dr. Lermer, if you could give us your video and perhaps we could pin him.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I'm not the most technologically savvy guy. Just give me a second. There we go. I think is it working?
Not really.
Yeah,
We
no.
can see that no,
Here we go.
there you go. Thank you.
Sorry, everyone.
Go ahead.
I'm better suited to be there. Okay. Hi, everyone. So I'm the owner with my wife Stephanie of 54 Georgina Street. I think everyone probably in the room remembers me from last time. I just want to take like a moment just to talk about, like, literally just briefly summarize. I've already sent in my letter of objection, and sorry for my mustache. It is November, so you guys all get a front row seat to this, but it is for a good cause. But anyways, so I just wanted to talk about my letter of objection. My objection, like, for the record, is not related to stopping progress in the municipality of Brighton. It is not to not have a long-term care facility at that exact site. I have very specific concerns, of which I really want it to be known explicitly, like basically what they are. Okay, so my very first concern is that there's huge momentum and progress with the site. I understand I already knew at the last meeting that we would have this meeting. Like, it's like there's lots of wheels in motion and whatever. I understand that. I also understand that, we can have our say and that there's other factors at play, provincial government at play. There's lots of motivations behind the scenes to push this thing forward in an expedited fashion. I understand all that. I do have a problem though with just accepting a building of this size and magnitude on a property there. Everyone that's walked by or drove on that road understands that I get that it's in the urban boundary of Brighton, right on the very fringe of it, but it really is a quiet residential section of our community. And I do believe that mixed residential uses are permissible in these areas, but I just think my true concern is the height, like going from like 1-story buildings all around there. I know it's stated in the application 3 stories. 3 stories are not found around that area. So like if you're looking at the general area, it's 1 stories, maybe 2. And you then go to 18 meters, as the new adjusted document might say, or even if it's 20, I don't know. The document's kind of riddled with lots of different errors in these areas, but say it's 18 meters, but a 5-story building is giant. It's enormous and it's giant. And I think it doesn't carry the current characteristics of that the small little hamlet of that community, like that's right in that vicinity. So I feel badly for the people that are going to live around this, to be honest with you. I think it's an eyesore. I'm sorry for the folks that think that building is a good looking building. I think it's ugly. I think it's a building that'll stand out like a big brick on a hill. And I can't wait for that to be Brighton's skyscape. But I mean, that's not what we're disputing today. That's, I mean, if I could say that municipality might have some influence over the architecture of the buildings that we put up in our small town, that would be lovely. It'd be lovely to actually try to persuade development to be suitable for its surroundings and its community nature. I know it's hard to do that with large buildings, but I just think that it's unfortunate that that Toby Developments isn't building his beautiful houses like that we all know he builds on that site, because that's kind of what we thought when we bought this property that it would be like, even if it were mixed residential towns, semis, and that sort of thing, that would be great. But I mean, that we're not there. We're here talking about a long-term care facility. And again, the province needs it, Brighton needs it, surrounding communities need it. We understand that, but I just think that the sheer size and height of it needs to be questioned. Not saying not to put one there. I just think that there's still a balance there, and that happy medium needs to be considered, and all parties involved need to be considered in a situation like this. So that's my first statement, to be honest. And my next one is the one that I actually have the most concern about, to be honest, because we live here. This is a country road, and so totally understand that we always are wary of the speeds on this road. you know, it's posted as 50 now, which is great. We all know that people don't drive 50. Of course, I'm probably guilty of it myself. Okay. But my very main concern though is that now that we're putting this building and the structure in here, and we're going to have basically hundreds of employees going there, changing shifts at various times, I absolutely 100% know that I know the status of our healthcare system. I know that all those PSWs, nurses, and staff are not coming from Brighton proper. Like, they're not going to be walking up Dundas Street to go to this place. Like, unfortunately, it's hard to find workers in this area. I know that they're going to be coming through the 401 corridor, a majority of them, and they're going to be going down Georgina. It's, you know, ask the OPP, you know, ask all the police officers which way they go to their building. I see them every single day, right? So, you know, I actually just know that there will be more traffic on Georgina Street, and I don't want to look away from that. I will be pursuing that because it is a major problem, and it's a safety concern for myself, my family, and the people that visit my property. I know that my adjacent neighbors, Mario, who can't be here tonight, but he also objects just to that safety standard because of the crest of the hill, the poor sight line. And I guess my big ask is that, like, okay, we can go forward with something like this, but I just want to be, I want it to be on record that I want these safety concerns to be addressed, whether it be by, you know, OMNI Group's responsibility, the township's responsibility. I don't know. I just think that somebody has to actually, you know, say something, stir the pot, get people thinking about it. And that's me. Like, I think, you know, like, I want people to be, you know, accountable to me and my family, and our safety over that hill with that increased amount of traffic that I do know will come that way. And I know that that's the intention for the long term as well. I know that there's an intention to make that Georgina Street continue on through. I know it's a part of the grant, you know, severance. Like, I get that there's further plans for Georgina Street, but the crest of that hill is a definite problem, and where our driveways are located is in an area that I know that there will be significant concerns with safety. So that's all I have to say. I appreciate you listening to me, but you know, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Larmer. Can we please make a note of the traffic concern that was noted and make sure it gets in front of the engineers managing the transportation master plan, please? Because if this does go through, I would agree with Dr. Larmer. It should be highlighted through the transportation master plan for at least some traffic calming issues and concerns. If you could come forward, and I know who you are, but if you could please state your name for the record. We'll need you to be mic'd up here. Yeah, well, because we have people on Zoom and YouTube, they need to be able to hear you as well.
Thank you. Okay. Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to speak. So my name is Melanie Gunter, and my husband Steve, and we are located at 6 Georgina Street. Been there just over 20 years. We also own property at 7 Hardy Lane, part lot 33, concession A. So it's one lot, but possibly 2 or 3. So I just wanted to speak. Actually, I'd like to thank council because originally a few years ago, the speed limit was 80 kilometers an hour. And Brian, you probably recall that I did communicate with you via email and did request it to be 50, and much appreciated because that's where it is. And people still drive very, very quickly on Georgina Street. But I thank council for approving my request years ago to put it down to 50 because it's much appreciated. And then I just wanted to speak again about a few questions because obviously we live right by the property. So I wanted to just ask, I have seen the plans on the municipality website. Is there a timeline for the work to start? And then I had a couple questions about the traffic. Would there be a road put on Hardy Lane basically for work vehicles? Where would they be when the construction started? Because obviously that's just a question that would Hardy Lane be, would the road be developed first for construction or where the vehicles would be, because our house is right there. So just a question about that. And then would there be more than one entrance to the facility? Again, speaking about traffic and flow and things like that. On Georgina Street, traffic does go fairly quickly. The stop sign's very close and the hill is very close. So just wondering about the entrances off Hardy Lane, and or Georgina Street. And then I believe, I know the answer to this question, but if the work did start, what time would it start each day if the bylaw is still 7 a.m.? That's everything. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So time for the work to start. Any ideas from staff?
Yeah, our bylaw, noise bylaw does regulate 7 till 7, I believe, and then at different hours for the weekend. But I can nail that down and get that information out to the
So
deputation.
they would be required to stick to our bylaw with regard to work. The question was, when would construction begin? Probably hard for us to nail that one down, but do you want to take a poke at it?
Sure, that would be hard to estimate, and it's really up to the proponent and how they can stage their material and labor, et cetera. Still have to go through a site plan control approval, and that will take some time as well. So we'll get into a lot of different details there in terms of off-site improvements, on-site improvements, and we'll get into the design drawings, construction design drawings at that point. So it's very detailed, and that'll take some time. And we don't have a site plan control application submitted, of course, with no zoning in place, but once that's in place, I believe OMNI did have a tentative timeframe, like a high-level timeframe. So I think they are hoping to have construction by the end of the year if zoning bylaw is approved.
End of next year.
Next year, yes.
Just to be clear,
Yeah.
we're approaching the end of this year.
Yeah, I'm already thinking next year.
Yeah. Aren't we all? But not everybody listening is. And the development of the roadway, I know we don't have a site plan. I know we're not that far down the road for details, but do you have any concept of where staff would want that to go? Because Hardy Lane is just a gravel road now, isn't it? Essentially, probably not even.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's only.
As I recall, it's sort of a one-lane
Correct.
dirt road, if you will.
Yeah.
So what would the plan there for during construction, I think is the question.
Sure, like Hardy Lane would need to be fully reconstructed, both above ground and underground services. So again, that will be specified in any site plan control approval that if it were to be given. But yeah, it'll need to be reconstructed.
And would that be done in advance of the construction of the LTC or at the same time?
Much the same time.
So we could anticipate construction vehicles would run along the current dirt road during the construction process.
Yeah, usually the heavy truck traffic, you want it to be towards the end of its activity before you asphalt.
Right. And the question was traffic flow.
That's right. Just because our property that we own, like we go down Hardy Lane to access the property.
So would your question is, would you still have access to? So I assume that, I mean, and there's at least 2 houses down Hardy Lane, right?
Just one.
Just the one? Okay.
Yeah.
So, and that's the one you own as well?
No, we do not own
Okay.
that house.
Okay.
There's a house and then we own the property on
Understood.
the other side of the house.
So would the property owner still have access to their properties along Hardy Lane?
Yes, we must ensure access.
Thank
Did
you
I
so
capture
much.
everything?
You did.
Perfect.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. Is there anyone else present who has questions or comments?
Hi, yes, I do.
Okay.
However, I would ask before any more members of the town present, maybe OMNI could present whatever they've prepared for this so that we actually are more educated and they can show us their vision.
Does OMNI have a presentation? Yeah. Or FO10 or whoever? Apparently.
Is that on? Oh, yes, there
It
we go.
is.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Miles Weeks. I'm a planner with Foten Consultants working on behalf of the applicant OMNI Group. And I'm joined here tonight by Rahim Hirji, who's also with OMNI Quality Living. And we do have a presentation. I just wanted to follow the flow of the room. So happy to prepare that. I'm curious if we could pull up our presentation slides on the screen here. Wonderful, thank you. So I think we can just skip to the next slide, and I'll try to be relatively brief, but I do want to provide everyone with a fairly comprehensive overview of kind of where we're at and what this project is all about. So we'll begin with a site and surrounding context overview, just talk briefly about the applicable policies, which Ron already alluded to. I'll provide a summary of the proposed development, and we'll go over the zoning bylaw amendment application itself, and I'll pass it over to Rahim just for a few words on OMNI, who they are, and what they're all about. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yes, please. Yeah, we'll just go right down. Perfect. So here we have an aerial image. Just I wanted to provide one clean shot so everyone can see the area. The site is quite central on the screen and all highlighted on the next slide. But as has been mentioned tonight, this site is really located at the intersection of Georgina Street and Hardy Lane, which Hardy Lane you can just see coming off Georgina there, and we're north of Dundas Street. Next slide, please. So not that everyone here isn't familiar with Brighton, but we thought we'd just share just an image, just putting the site in context with the municipality. So you can see the site highlighted faintly in red, sort of towards the upper right-hand corner. Hardy Lane is identified there, as well as Georgina Street. The site is currently vacant. It's got a variety of agricultural uses around it. As was mentioned earlier tonight, it is on the edge of the urban boundary. So Georgina Street is actually the limit of the urban boundary. And to the west, you've got a variety of low-rise residential neighborhoods. You've got schools, the library, and municipal offices where we are tonight, grocery stores, a variety of other uses that I'm sure everyone is quite familiar with. Next slide, please. So this is the site itself. For those who may recall from the past meeting earlier this year, there is a consent application that goes along with the zoning bylaw amendment we're discussing tonight, and that consent application would be to sever the property into two pieces. Essentially, part one, as shown on the screen, would remain as is today, may be developed in the future, but there are no plans for that land at this time that are being proposed. Part two would be severed, and that is where the proposed long-term care facility would be located. So it's specifically within that highlighted red portion of the property. Next slide, please. And you can skip the header slides. Thanks. So in terms of the policy context, the site is located within the urban boundary of Brighton, and that's as per the Northumberland County official plan. Next slide. Looking at the Brighton official plan, the site is actually designated residential, as are the surrounding lands, as I'm sure everyone is well aware. And this obviously contrasts with the current use of the land. Not to say that the use is inappropriate, but that the land is planned for growth and residential use in the long term. Next slide, please. Thank you. So finally, for zoning, as you can see, the site itself is zoned agricultural, or maybe you can't. It's quite small on the screens here in the room, but it is zoned agricultural. And that really reflects the current use of the property. To the south, on the south side of Hardy Lane, the properties are zoned residential, as are a number of the properties to the west on sort of the left side of the screen. Understandably, those are developed residential neighborhoods. Next slide, please. So just to get a little bit more into the details of the proposal, this is a severance sketch that was prepared for the previous meeting earlier this year. It has been updated since we last met in the summer. What has changed, really the only change, has been for that future Singleton Street extension, which is discussed in the staff report. That extension has been shifted southwards. It was previously planned to have 10 meters of that extension on the subject lands, 10 meters on the lands of the neighboring property owner to the north. We have shifted that so that the full 20-meter right-of-way for Singleton Street, if extended in the future, would be located entirely on the subject lands. So there's no impacts in that sense to the neighboring owner to the north. Their lands would not be required to facilitate that extension. Otherwise, the plan remains the same. The retained lands are to the west. There is an additional widening of approximately 5 meters proposed along Georgina Street for future improvements, and also 9 by 9 meter site triangles at either corner of the property along Georgina. Next slide, please. So the proposed development itself, I've just highlighted a few quick notes here before moving on to the actual plan. But it is a 4-story building, and that is approximately 18 meters in height. It will include 256 long-term care beds and has 131 parking spaces, 6 bicycle parking spaces, 1 loading space, and it has been designed to account for waste collection, movement of emergency service vehicles, things of that nature. The site also has roughly a third, so 33.5% of the site being landscaped open spaces. So this is essentially excluding all of the paved areas and the building itself. The rest of the property is green in some nature, whether it's grass or plantings, things like that. We do have pedestrian connections proposed throughout the site for the movement of pedestrians, as well as a plan which shows pedestrian connections out through to Dundas Street, really to link the site to the sidewalk on the south side of Dundas Street in the future. And as I mentioned, there is the 20-meter conveyance for the future Singleton Street extension. In support of the application, we have prepared a number of studies that includes a planning justification report prepared by myself, as well as a traffic impact study, a stormwater management report, a functional servicing report, a site plan, floor plans and elevations, and again, that pedestrian connections plan. Next slide, please. So here's the site plan. As was mentioned, this was updated since our initial submission in response to feedback we've been hearing. Really, it was to accommodate that 20-meter Singleton Street extension. And as a result, the building itself didn't move at all, but some of the setbacks have shifted a little bit. So I just want to highlight the setbacks around the property. The property, or rather the building itself, the long-term care facility, is 27 meters from the future limit of Georgina Street. So that's with the 5-meter widening. The building will be roughly 27 meters from Georgina Street. To the south along Hardy Lane, the building will be roughly 18.5 meters setback. To the west, where there's currently vacant agricultural lands, we have another, I believe, 25.8 meter setback, and to the north there is an 18-meter setback again, plus the 20-meter widening being provided for Singleton Street. The building itself, I just want to highlight, it's a fairly unique shape. It's got these 4 wings, and for a long-term care facility, obviously it's a fairly unique building. There's a lot of services that have to be provided for the residents because they require a higher level of support than you might see in a more typical retirement home or something of that nature. So each of the 4 wings is where residents would live, and then if you'll think of it as kind of the base of the building, that continuous piece connecting all 4 wings, that's really where all the services are concentrated. So that's where the nurse staff lounges, everything of that nature is generally located along the base to serve all 4 of those wings, and those wings would have residents on all 4 levels. One thing I do want to highlight is the job opportunities that come with a facility of this nature. So OMNI is anticipating approximately 250 job opportunities. That includes nurses, cook staff, admin, PSWs, a variety of other job opportunities, and likely that's going to translate to 100 staff per day on site, and that would be for a typical day. That's really what I wanted to highlight here, so we'll move on to the next slide. Just to quickly look at the floor plans and just paint a bit more of a picture, the site slopes, anyone who's been by it can probably tell, it really slopes from the northeast corner right at Georgina down towards the southwest corner, which is kind of at the end of Hardy Lane where it terminates now. And as a result of that grade change, the building will effectively have a walkout basement. So when you're looking at it from the rear, that primary entrance is effectively a basement. And on the screen here, those X's mark areas that will not be developed. Instead of having kind of an underground building, they simply will just have foundations, and there will be no floor area in those locations. This kind of walkout basement is an entrance. It will have all of the mechanical and utility services, staff lounges, a couple amenities like a multi-purpose room, but no residents living on the ground floor. Next slide, please. The second level, this is a typical floor plan for really the 4 primary floors of the building. As you can see, the 4 wings have all of the resident beds. And then that base component, as I mentioned, you can see kind of little dining tables identified on the plan. There are nursing stations, kitchens, elevators, everything that the residents on each floor need to successfully operate the facility. And the critical item here is that each floor has all of these services. And that's really one of the challenges with a long-term care facility, is you can't just have one dining room down on the ground floor. It does take a larger building because every single floor needs these facilities just by the nature of the individuals who are living here. They are generally requiring higher levels of support and are not quite as mobile. So next slide, please. So what we have here are elevations of the building, just to give a sense of the height. And what I really want to point out is on the upper graphic, the north elevation, essentially. So this is, if you can imagine, where the property to the north, or even you're standing on the future Singleton Street extension, you can see the line, which is essentially the grade of the site and how it cuts from Georgina, which would be on the left of the screen, down towards the back of the building on the right of the screen. That kind of gives you a sense of this change in topography on the property and how it is kind of a walkout basement entrance. And then we'll have 4 stories facing Georgina. We can go to the next slide or even the one after. They're essentially all just elevations, and happy to come back to them if anyone wants to ask any questions. So to get to the specifics of the zoning bylaw amendment, as I mentioned, the property is currently zoned agricultural. We're proposing to rezone it to an urban residential R3 zone with a special exception to permit, first and foremost, a long-term care facility, which is not actually a defined use in Brighton's zoning bylaw. So we'll be introducing that as a term. And then to establish a few specific performance standards for the property. Firstly is to limit the facility to 256 long-term care beds. Secondly is to limit the height to 18 meters. And finally, more of a technical requirement, but to increase the maximum rear yard setback to 27 meters. Currently, there is a limit that doesn't really make sense in the context of a site of this size. So it's just to acknowledge that we're providing a greater setback than is actually permitted for other similar facilities in these types of zones. Secondly, there will be an amendment to the agricultural zoning for the remnant parcel, that part 1 we looked at earlier. That's simply to acknowledge that that piece of land is losing its frontage on Georgina, so it will only have roughly 20 meters of frontage on Hardy Lane, as well as a small bit of frontage on Dundas Street. So next slide. I'm almost done here. This is just to visualize it. You can see the R3 zone being proposed. You can see the piece of land being excluded for the future Singleton Street extension. And you can see that site-specific exception for the agricultural parcel. Again, no new development is proposed on that agricultural parcel. This facility would be located entirely on the portion of land there zoned R3 on the schedule. And I think we can skip ahead a couple of slides to the OMNI slide, and I'll pass it over to Raheem just to speak a little bit about OMNI.
Thanks, Matt. Good evening, everyone. So just wanted to take the opportunity to provide a little bit of background on OMNI. We're fortunate next year we're actually celebrating our 50th year in business. We own and operate about 3,000 beds between Ontario and New Brunswick. New Brunswick's a very small portion of where we operate. We have been in long-term care in Ontario and intend to grow that way for a number of years to come. Our Chief Operating Officer, Sean Riel, has been with us for 45 years. We've had a number of long-tenured employees, and we certainly put care and safety first. We're a very resident-centric community. If I can ask somebody to flip to the next slide. I'll just point out our mission here because it's something we live by every day. It's what we start all our meetings with. It's supporting each unique individual we care for to experience hope, purpose, and belonging. And this has changed over the years, but has been an underlying crux of our mantra for the last 50 years as well. Next slide, please. So many of you may know OMNI Maplewood right now at Main and Ontario Street. This home was built in 1983, and I just found out we actually purchased it in 1997. So from the Carewell, it was part of the Carewell portfolio. But this is an older home. It's definitely not up to the latest design standards, the 2015 Ministry of Long-Term Care standards, and there's been a big push to redevelop 58,000 beds in the province. And as we know, there's a significant and growing wait list all across the province, but specifically here in Brighton too. This home has 49 beds, but during the pandemic, the government took out some beds out of operations. Those that had 3 and 4 beds in a room, those were decanted and taken out of operation. So this has only amplified the need for long-term care and new long-term care spaces in our communities. And I have to add that we have license terms, and these licenses expire next year, mid next year. So we're really excited about the opportunity of rebuilding and building to the latest and greatest design standards, because it's not only about new staff and new jobs coming in. If we cannot preserve this home beyond our license expiry term, we risk jobs leaving the community. We risk residents not having a place to be if the government shuts down these homes without having a viable redevelopment plan. So I just want to make that distinction. It's not only about adding new, it's about preserving what we already have in the community of Brighton. And you may know our neighboring homes. We own and operate homes in Campbellford and Peterborough, and we've been building and retrofitting and across the province. And every municipality has welcomed this as social infrastructure. Our residents are extremely happy. If I can ask for the next slide. We actually have a more completed home, but we completed a home last year in Long Sault outside of Cornwall. And you know, I'm biased obviously, but this would rival retirement homes. We don't build just to the minimum design standard from the ministry. Part of the reason the building is big is to accommodate spaces for our residents. And that's why it's an awkward number, like 256, because it's divisible by 32. The way the Ministry of Long-Term Care works is we have to build in 32-bed home areas, or pods, if you will. And so each one of those pods come with its own servery, its own activity room, its own dining area, and that's mandated. But we as OMNI agree with that approach because it allows people to live with dignity and have space instead of being cramped in older facilities. So I just want to put that out there. We're building across, and we're really excited about the prospect of this. There has been a speed element to this to take advantage of the Ministry of Long-Term Care's funding program and to capitalize on this. As you know, development has been tough all across the province. COVID hasn't helped at all, but we're at the point where we're in kind of a critical time area to tap into this. Otherwise, it risks the viability of the project. That was it for me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, if I can add.
Of course.
The comment around design. Our architects, SRM, have spent a lot of time in Brighton and looking at some of the new development. And that is actually how we came up with the design. The shape itself is a common shape. You would have seen it. Schlegel Villages employs this shape quite a bit, and they have a beautiful campus in Waterloo. That's how we came up with the idea. We won't take credit for inventing the shape, but in terms of the facade and the design, it was very intentional, and a lot of research was done actually walking around Brighton and seeing what's coming up now and how do we blend this into the overall community.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So who was next? Richard?
Yeah, I've got a presentation as well, so I'll put my screen share on if that's okay.
You may.
Excellent. Okay. You're able to see my screen?
We can, thank you.
Okay, perfect. All right. So I'm going to try and keep this relatively concise. I have quite a lot of material to go through, and it's been helpful hearing from others. So first of all, thank you to Council for giving me the opportunity to present. I also want to do a bit of a call out for Director Walsh and his team, planning team. This has been a very arduous and long journey, and while it's taken a toll on my health, his team has been fantastic with boiling things down to a simple, keep things simple for simple people like me. That being said, I do have a number of concerns in relation to the proposed development, although it is interesting from the slide deck just presented that we can put 128 beds on a single floor building, so questions why we need a 5-floor building for 256. With that in mind, main issues here tonight, there's about 5 or 6 of them. The first one is the scale of this building. It's not in keeping with the character of the neighborhood. Now, I know there are at least one of you that will say the character doesn't apply because we're comparing apples and pears, but I would argue to the contrary. It applies more importantly when you're considering something so large and so drastic in comparison to single-story buildings with the occasional 2-story buildings in the surrounding area. The current road is barely safe to walk along. Existing residents barely use it as a result, let alone with the increased traffic. It's interesting to note in the design, there's no proposed sidewalk along Georgina Street. Yes, there is one that walks down onto Dundas Street. Yes, there's one that takes you down through the property itself, but there's nothing to enable children to walk safely from one home to another, or there is nothing to enable pedestrians to take refuge with the increased traffic as they walk along the road, parts of the road that are not connected. There are a number of better suited places for a facility such as this size. So to be clear, myself and many of these people that have concerns, we're not against the LTC. We're against its proposed size in this location. Highway 2 has a number of locations that are springing up at the moment with large buildings. Something like this wouldn't look out of place there, but where it is now, where it is today, it will do. Probably the biggest and most alarming aspect for me is the lack of privacy that surrounding neighbours will have, especially those with the smaller homes and the lack of tree lines to protect them. I'm not a realtor, so I can't say this definitively, but I also imagine it would have an impact on their property prices. The traffic study as well. It's far from thorough. In fact, it's riddled with anomalies. It very much paints a picture that shows OMNI only has to do the bare minimum, rather than enhancing Georgina Street and the surrounding area for the residents that already live there. Now, my final point. I came before you in July and made a very impassioned speech regarding the Singleton Street expansion and the proposed 10 metres on my land. What I wasn't prepared for was the mental stress and anxiety that came as a result of that. Upon doing a freedom of information request, we found that this discussion had actually been raised with OMNI as far back as October 2023. However, just as we saw now where I had to prompt them to present, it was very clear to me that now that I feel they were hoping to sneak this one through and get that 10 metres from our land without us being consulted. The decent thing to have done would have been to reach out to us well before the July event. And it's very clear to me that this could have been done very easily. They know where we live. So, moving on. The proposed structure, 20 metres, 18 metres, 21 metres. I don't really know at this point, but it's clear it's going to overlook other properties. The town's existing bylaws say 11 metres for a property. So this is almost double that size. The report that OMNI has provided as well, with the justification report, actually is very misleading. It says, and I quote, the proposed development will not have any direct lines of sight into neighbourhood rear yards. Unfortunately, a picture paints 1,000 words. These photos I took with a drone in the summer, shortly after the application. These are about 20 metres from within the proposed land by OMNI. As you can clearly see, I can see a swimming pool. I can see the surrounding area in the backyards of these people. This is stuff that will easily be seen from such a building. Regardless of how far setback it is, may vary the angle, but you can clearly see into the backyard, which proves that report is not accurate, is not true. It doesn't take into account the people that live in the surrounding area. If we also look at coming from my property onto the field, now had these trees been cut down as part of the 10-meter easement that they were trying to take, we would have lost all of our privacy. I can see clearly at 20 meters into the field, and the true is the same the other way. For context, this is approximately where the drone photos were taken, clearly not over Hardy Lane and not far from where the proposed development with the setbacks currently is. Now I move on to the traffic study. This is something that actually came as a bit of a surprise. Mr. Lama had asked for it. We were grateful it was done. However, the numbers in it just don't add up. If we look at the table on the right, you'll notice the inbound traffic for the PM slot says 24. However, immediately underneath, it mentions 81, which says to me, this is a copy and paste, or the numbers have been revised down to represent a better picture. I have no proof either way, but it's flawed. The traffic study was also taken over a 2-hour window at 2 periods a day. It failed to take into account traffic patterns throughout the day. It also was undertaken on a summer holiday. There are lots of school buses that run down that road. I can tell you there's a lot of cars that run down that road for a school morning. So again, a summer holiday is not an accurate time. This should have been taken over several days, probably over several weeks, in several different times of the year to clearly paint a picture and provide not only plans for what is required for the LTC, but also for the longer term development of town strategies. A 256-bed care home in Peterborough lists 390 staff. Now, I know we heard earlier clarification of 100 staff a day, so that accounts for the 100 spaces, which I've been trying to work out in my head, but it doesn't take into account all the visitors, all the people that are going to supposedly come and see their loved ones. And this is the thing I really can't understand. There are 130 parking spaces. However, only 4 are going to be for disabled. The current town bylaws require a 1:4 ratio for beds, for spaces. So by that maths, OMNI technically only has to provide 51 to 75 spaces, 64 spaces, so 3. However, given they have 130 spaces, they actually are required to provide 5 parking spaces for disabled. I still think this is a very low number. My kids go to a school with 30 parking spaces. They have 4 disabled bays. Last time I checked, a long-term care home has disabled people, has people with limited mobility. So this seems like an insufficient number for the clientele, especially when you consider many of those aged people will also have relatives that are probably of similar age as with mobility issues. I promise I'm nearly done. 2 more slides. Okay, so the sightlines. This is something which there's been a bit of chatter about, but again, photos paint 1,000 words. So this is the proposed design, slightly outdated, but still shows the access road 3. Interestingly, someone's drawn a line to the frontage of my property, to my driveway, 153 meters or so. I can't read from my screen. Now, in it, it gives the impression that you can see to the front of my property. However, if I park at about the same location as that access road 3, I can only see to the second arrow. This clearly is about 50% of the way to my driveway, meaning neither myself at the top of the hill coming out, nor the person at the bottom of the hill coming out has any chance of being able to see my driveway, let alone the driveways further up. So in conclusion, the pavements. It's very interesting. There's a pavement that has been proposed that goes down to Dundas Street from Georgina, which is great for Hardy Lane. However, I feel it's primarily there out of convenience to benefit the LTC. It doesn't provide any real benefits to the residents of Georgina Street. I've raised the concern around speeds before. I've had numerous calls with OMNI in trying to resolve the Singleton Street issue. And one thing that came to my light was, and I think there's an email actually from Miles that basically says they didn't want to give the road. They have very little interest in supporting the local town and the development beyond what they're being forced to give or what is being suggested to them versus them using common sense. It would have been very easy for them to come up with an idea here. Freeway stop signs at the end, south end and the north end. Especially considering the fact that most of the traffic is going to be coming off the 401 from people out of town as they come to work at the LTC. I think I remember seeing a slide earlier that actually said that a number of LTCs were being closed down to combine into this one. So I do question whether it's actually going to create new jobs or just move jobs from nearby LTCs and create new beds or move them from nearby LTCs. And to give some context to Georgina Street, last year, when we had the heavy snowfall, the farmer had to clear the road. Not the town, not the province, no one else, the farmer. Now, I'm sure we'll get extra special treatment as a result of this facility being there, but that's not right. We already pay our taxes. Why should it take a large corporation from out of town coming for improvements versus for those that already live there? So, in conclusion, thank you. To say, I consider the LTC being a good and much needed development within Brighton, regardless of who the developer is. The only ask is that the zoning application is deferred until the applicant has undertaken additional discussion with the public and neighbouring property owners to review the alternative designs, and that may alleviate at least reduce some of the concerns. I seem to remember in one of my conversations with Raheem previously, he hadn't even been to Brighton until closer to this point. So again, this is not the local area. Have these discussions, talk to these people, understand their concerns. We further ask council to consider the important factors when making a decision on this application by striking a balance between fairness and upholding the duty of care to the residents of Brighton. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Does anyone want to address any of those questions or concerns?
Still on? Yes, we are. Okay. Well, I think what I'll do is I will actually address all the comments I've received thus far tonight, or rather we've heard, and do my best to address them. I have taken detailed note here. If council feels I've missed anything, please feel free to remind me. I'd be happy to address anything I might have missed. So, okay, just bear with me. I apologize. So, going back a little bit. Regarding, I think we've heard a few comments about character and compatibility. I think first and foremost, I'll say certainly this is not us representing this as no change for the community. This is a change. It's a long-term care facility. It's not a single detached home. It is different, but that does not necessarily mean it is inherently incompatible. And I think one thing I would just point to and to just kind of guide the way we discuss these sort of issues is the municipality's official plan. And section 4.3.1, which for those who aren't directly aware is just the general policies for development in the community, guiding principles that we should all keep in mind for any development, regardless of type. And specifically, it says that various forms of housing will not be intermixed indiscriminately, suggesting that there should be care taken when mixing different types of housing. Housing types will be arranged in a gradation so that medium and high density developments will complement those of a lower density with sufficient spacing to ensure compatibility while also maintaining privacy and the amenity value of low density areas. And I think that is telling, and certainly there are different perceptions of what impact is. And one of the challenging issues with character is that it is inherently subjective. But what I would point to, and we have a graphic roughly showing it, but I think I can just speak to it, is that while I mentioned setbacks earlier, the distance from the proposed building to the neighboring homes that are nearest to, I guess, to the south along Hardy Lane and to the north along Georgina Street. Georgina Street ranges from anywhere from, to be conservative, around 50 meters to the nearest home to 125 meters even to the north. And that's a substantial setback. Certainly, you know, I can see a kilometer down the road. That doesn't necessarily mean that has a sight line. And obviously I'm exaggerating the issue, but I think all it's to say is that sight lines with sufficient spacing can be appropriate. And backyards are generally, you know, behind the home. If there are, you know, green spaces out front, certainly there's going to be people seeing people in their front yards, but there are still private areas for these homes. And the drone photos that were shown, I just would generally disagree that setback doesn't matter. I think distance does matter. And rather than being 20 meters from those homes, the building will actually be 50 plus meters from the nearest homes in the area. And I guess just to kind of wrap up that discussion on compatibility, what we've tried to do is maintain appropriate setbacks to properties that are existing in the area to ensure sufficient separation. And yes, there will be change, but to make sure that it will be appropriate change, but to also keep in mind to the future where, as we've acknowledged, I think multiple times tonight, there will be change in this community. There will be growth in this area. It's designated for residential. And as I understand it, there's a secondary plan process underway that we've worked with staff on, although I haven't seen the plans myself. It's my understanding that there will be planned growth in the area. And that may take a long time, but this facility will be designed to have sufficient separation on all sides from both existing and future development. So we're taking an eye to the present as well as the future. Regarding, I think a lot of the questions regarding timelines for construction, construction-related impacts to the road, when will the road be updated? I believe those were addressed by Paul primarily already. If there are additional questions or clarifications needed, we'd be happy to answer. Regarding the traffic study, I suppose we can go to next. So just to kind of summarize what we heard, you know, it was noted there's a 50 km/h speed limit, that this is a relatively low traffic area, and that there were concerns with sight lines to the crest of the hill. So I think those were, just to generally summarize, I guess pedestrian access, there's no sidewalks along Georgina. So those were kind of some of the general comments. And regarding those and how they tie into the traffic study, I understand it was presented that there are some concerns with how the traffic study was prepared. And the purpose of the traffic study is really to identify if there are going to be impacts to the road infrastructure, particularly intersections, that would require or warrant upgrades to the road. And we spoke with our traffic consultant over the last couple of days, in particular in response to some of these comments that have come in, and they reassured us that further analysis can be completed through the site plan process. That's typical. We'll continue to work with staff to address comments we've heard tonight. But first and foremost, that the findings that we're seeing so far are conservative even. So we discussed the 50 km/h speed limit. And when looking at things like sight lines, one of the things traffic consultants will do is they essentially calculate how far you can see and what the speed limit on a road is. And then they use the national standards for essentially transportation design guidelines to determine how far of a distance you need to brake at that speed. On a 50 km/h road, they actually used a 60 km/h speed limit, acknowledging that people don't drive the speed limit. I think beyond 60 km/h, that's an enforcement issue. If people are going 80, 90, I think we can all agree that's not the way it should be going. But at 60 km/h, that is realistic, and that is actually the threshold they used, and they found that the sight lines were appropriate. If there are further questions about that, certainly I'm sure staff will be looking at it very closely through the site plan process, but there are opportunities to refine those details as we go along. Regarding, I guess, pedestrian circulation, there was a really good point Mr. Thake made, I believe, about sidewalks along Georgina Street. And we had considered showing sidewalks along Georgina on the plans, but part of the problem is Georgina is going to be developed and grow outside of just this development in the long term. And It will be partly a municipally led process to grow Georgina, and I believe it's noted even in the staff report that that specific issue of sidewalks will be reviewed through the site plan process to determine if it's warranted at this time. Certainly, OMNI is open to that discussion. The sidewalk would be on the municipal property, not the private property, as would be expected. But that's not something we're opposed to. We simply didn't show it because there's a larger picture at play here with the secondary plan that we're not privy to, but we are open to that discussion with staff through the process. Regarding the connection to Dundas Street, in my mind, it is an excellent option. It provides more of an inter-block connection that is quite nice for pedestrians, rather than putting sidewalks in front of houses along Georgina Street on that last block. Although, you know, that's an option we could look at as well. It simply might tie in, as I mentioned, to a more holistic assessment of development along Georgina and how that road will grow in the near and long-term future. I believe that generally covers most of those comments. I know there was a comment about accessible parking and whether or not it was sufficient. It does meet the minimum requirement in the zoning bylaw, as per my review and staff's as well. Certainly, more can always be provided, but we do look to OMNI when we're exceeding zoning bylaw requirements. We do look to OMNI and facility operators to understand what they need. Certainly, of all the people in the room, they know best what these spaces actually get used for, and there isn't much point providing accessible spaces if they're sitting vacant. So I do also look to the operator to understand what's needed, and my understanding is is appropriate for this site. Finally, just on traffic, because it was a big item, I do want to talk about just how the study was completed and perhaps clarify some misconceptions that there may be about some of the numbers. And I apologize, I couldn't see all of the numbers on the screen, so I'm not specifically speaking to those, but just generally speaking, the way traffic like when we're assessing traffic, the way the engineers look at it is to understand during the peak hours, morning, evening, you know, what are the worst hours in terms of traffic flow on a site, and how will those impact the road network? And that's really what it looks at. Georgina Street right now has very little traffic, and certainly I agree the study was done in the summer. But our traffic consultant, you know, while they're willing to go back out to the site, look at school buses, any school-related traffic, we don't think that's necessarily going to fundamentally change the impacts on the road network, though we're happy to look at it through the site plan process with staff. When we're looking at those peak PM and AM travel times, we do have to consider in the context of this site that we have 100 staff per day. That's kind of what we're looking at coming in and leaving the site. It's not concentrated in 1 hour. So when we say the peak traffic flow is, say, 37 outbound trips, that's kind of, you know, maybe your 5 p.m. on a Thursday. Well, it doesn't really acknowledge that different staff, you know, are spread out throughout the day. So we don't actually expect 100 trips in all within 5 minutes and 100 trips out all within 5 minutes. We expect those to be scattered. You can imagine cooks, for example, they might come in a bit earlier. Admin staff, they'll come in a bit later. The traffic flow is going to be there. It's going to be a change, but it is going to be spread out through the day. And I think that is an important consideration when reading the findings of that study. But it's not my area of expertise, and I feel like I've talked a bunch about traffic, so I will move on there. But please, if there are any questions, I'm happy to do my best to answer. I guess just because it was directly referencing an email I sent, I did want to address the quote saying, essentially implying that I didn't want to work with the town on the Singleton Street extension. I would clarify the context of that email to simply say that I think it's fair to say that any landowner or developer would rather not give up land, and that essentially we are in fact working with the municipality to plan for future road networks that are to the benefit of the growth of the municipality. In the absence of any future plans in the area, sure, we would rather not give up a road extension, but we are happy to work with the municipality. I think, frankly, we've demonstrated that through the process with Paul and Ron. But I did just want to clarify that. I don't think it was intended. I know it wasn't intended as saying we wouldn't work with the municipality. So just to clarify that. I mean, there was a number of other comments. I'm just seeing if I missed anything critical. Yes, please, Raheem. Yeah, I think I've covered most of what I wanted to touch on.
Thank you, everyone. So just to clarify a few things, I have been to Brighton many times. We own and operate a home here. We've been in chats on redevelopment for a number of years. So have been here, have been in chats with Mr. Thake himself on potentially working on a solution on the Singleton Street extension. At one point, he wanted to intensify his property with and looking for a cost share from OMNI, which we, but that wasn't helping any concerns, but we wanted to engage the neighbors. So we're not in the business of paying off to subjugate concerns. And then the last thing I think that came up was the no new jobs because we're consolidating a number of homes. We're consolidating 3 homes, Maplewood home in Brighton and 2 in Picton, which gives us 141 licenses. And the ministry is topping OMNI up with 150 new licenses. So there will absolutely be a net new benefit to the community of Brighton. Thank you.
Thank you both. Is there anyone else present with questions or comments?
Yeah, so I'm gonna jump in there.
Richard,
sorry.
I'll come back to you. Richard,
No,
I'll come back.
sorry, Mr.
Richard, I'll come
Atfield,
back to you.
Raheem's
I'll come
not
back to
happy
you.
with- Okay. Not happy with that.
We'll just get you to sign your name and information in the sheet that's up there and then provide us with your name for the record.
Of
if you will.
course, no problem. Okay. Sorted. So good evening, Honorable Mayor and council members. Thank you for allowing me to speak here this evening. And I ask that you indulge me because I am a bit overcome this evening. I'm overcome by striking.
I'll just get you to give us your name for the
Oh,
record.
sorry about
That's
that.
okay.
It's Nadia Nelson. I'm Richard's wife and also resident at 30 Georgina Street.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So I'm a bit overcome as the direct neighbor, of course, to the proposed LTC and being able to articulate the facts here before you today. I stand here or sit here, not only as a concerned member of this community, but as someone who believes deeply in the values that shape our small town. Values that place people before profits, fairness before convenience, and integrity above all. Today, we are faced with a critical decision, a decision that could fundamentally alter the character of our community and the quality of life of its residents. While I recognize the importance of the proposed LTC and the need for such facilities, and as so eloquently stated by Raheem, the need for their such, and to basically strike while the iron's hot, to paraphrase, particularly considering our aging population. I believe that the due diligence required to assess this development has been hasty and inadequate. I urge council to take a step back and reconsider whether enough has truly been done to ensure that this project is in the best interest of our residents, especially in its current form. First and foremost, I want to address the road study. While I am by no means a subject matter expert on this, I do have my opinions. I have my opinion that this has been conducted for the development, as Miles used the term subjective. In my profession, I'm a lawyer. My job is to represent my client zealously. Miles's job is to represent his client zealously. And whoever is paid to do a traffic study is paid to represent the best interest of their client. As such, I would like to that thought to be truly I would like for that thought to be truly considered. The proposed facility, a massive structure in its current form, will undoubtedly have a significant impact to our infrastructure. Bear with me, let me paint a picture, a personal story. Approximately 2 years ago on Georgina Street, there was some form of work being done. I think fiber optics were going in. Please don't quote me in open forum. However, based on the work that was being done, there were heavy vehicles coming in and out of Georgina Street. And what was left behind were 2 massive potholes. When we called, and on top of that, we had gravel along our front yard. And anybody who's ever driven down Georgina Street, it is well taken care of, well manicured, very charming street. As a result of the potholes that were there and the damage that was left, we were left with damaged blades from our lawnmower, and also a bill for a tire damage that I dare not speak of in open forum, the cost of replacement. So from the potholes that prevailed, on top of it, it took not 1, but 2 attempts to first Band-Aid the solution, and secondly, resolve the pothole issue once and for all. This was done over the span of several months. Ask yourself, council, if we had an issue as a community, had such an issue to fix 2 potholes on Georgina Street, given the level of vehicles, large vehicles that are going to come in and out, are we really prepared at this time to proceed with that decision? The study that was presented to us is flawed and incomplete and does not adequately address the traffic and safety concerns raised by residents. Our town is simply not equipped at this time to handle the sheer scale of this development, again, in its current form, without serious consequences. What will happen when hundreds of new residents and staff converge at this facility daily, as was previously mentioned, and I can't recall, but upwards of 100 staff coming in and out of this facility? Or children walk there daily, or elderly drive there, and or families rely to go about our daily lives. The study does not address these fundamental questions, and lack of foresight in this regard puts our community at risk. Due diligence requires that we ask the questions now before it's too late. Secondly, I want to speak about the balance of fairness. We must remember that the residents of this town are not mere bystanders in the process. We are the key constituents, the people whose lives will be impacted every single day by the decisions made here in Chamber. A balance must be struck between the needs of the developer, who represents a business interest, and the needs of the community, whose very character and way of life are at stake. The proposal before us represents a massive commercial undertaking backed by developers from outside our town that, again, are seeking to capitalize while the iron's hot. While they seek to build a profitable business, we must ask, what is the true cost to our community? Fairness demands that we, the residents, are not simply treated as an afterthought. Our needs and concerns must be at the forefront of this process. At the core of this issue is the question, who is this development truly serving? Is it serving our community, which values small town living, or local businesses, and or quality of life? Or is it serving developers' bottom line without the consideration of the bigger picture and the consequences thereof? Finally, I want to address a deeply concerning issue that goes beyond the specifics of this development, one that touches on the constitutional principles that bind us as a nation. We believe in a country where the rights of individuals, and by extension, the rights of communities, are protected. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees rights to life, liberty, and security. And these rights should not be undermined by decisions that disregard the needs and well-being of ordinary Canadians, particularly when they are overruled by the demands of large outside corporations. When this council prioritizes a developer's interests over the voices of its own residents, we risk violating the very principles that define us. We must ask ourselves, are we fulfilling our duty to ensure that the interests of all citizens are respected? Are we willing to stand up for our community, or will we cede to forces that see us merely as a line on a balance sheet? It is vital that Council recognizes the constitutional duty to ensure fairness, inclusivity, and respect for all citizens. This is not simply about a building project. It's about protecting the fundamental values of democracy, justice, and fairness for all members of our community, especially those whose voices may never, ever be heard. I ask that Council take its responsibility seriously. This is not a matter of speed. This is a matter of careful consideration, responsible governance, and transparent decision-making. If we're to move forward with the proposed LTC facility, we must demand that developers in the town meet the highest standard of due diligence. This includes conducting thorough studies on the road safety, traffic, infrastructure impact, and any environmental concerns. It also includes genuine engagement with the community so that we can address the concerns of those who will be directly affected. In conclusion, I ask this council to pause, reflect, and ensure that we're living up to the values that have shaped this community for generations. We're not just small-town folks who have been dismissed as irrelevant. We are citizens who deserve to have our voices heard and our concerns addressed and our rights respected. The future of our town is at stake should this LTC proceed in its current form. Let us be sure that we're acting in a way that is just, fair, and true to the principles that make us who we truly are. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. Appreciate your comments. I'm not sure there were any specific questions that need to be addressed.
No, I just wanted
Thank you.
to
Yeah,
put forward.
okay.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Anyone else present or on Zoom who has questions or comments? Richard, I do have your name down. I just want to make sure others get their opportunity. Okay, Richard, over to you.
Okay, first of all, my apologies, Mr. Mayor, for trying to talk over you there. I just felt a little overwhelmed with the approach that was taken there.
It happens, Richard. It's okay.
Yeah.
Carry on.
So, okay, so a few comments. First of all, I'd like to just address council sort of to set the record straight. In July's meeting, we said we had no real financial interest in, a road or anything like that, and that still sounds true. However, faced with the possibility of losing our tree line, because at the time it felt very much it's going to be forced upon us and it's not something we could control, we did look to understand what our options are, with the ultimate view of we would probably end up having to leave the property and move out of town because our beautiful home would be destroyed. And in doing so, I did mention to OMNI the fact that the cost would be prohibitive for us to be able to do on our own, with the costs of severing and the legal process and things. But I didn't try to do any sort of cash swap deal or whatever. The internet broke out for a second, but it did feel like a bit of a low blow there. Anyway, needless to say, we came to the conclusion that it wasn't something that was viable, and that's where it stands with the road. I think that subject's been closed, so I'm going to leave that there. I personally, it took a big toll on me, especially dealing with the lack of information, the lack of transparency all along, and I felt we have been somewhat treated as if we will, take whatever's handed to us versus actually having an option in this. Separately to that, going back to the pavements, or the sidewalks, sorry, as we call them in Canada, along Georgina Street, yes, maybe they, along the rest of it, that's a separate issue for a secondary plan. However, given OMNI is developing and this building is being constructed in the near future, it would be logical and it would be reasonable for them to incur the cost rather than the taxpayer of Brighton for constructing sidewalks along their property. Not least because the increase in traffic, we're also going to see more emergency vehicles, more rushing vehicles to get to and from the facility, and people are going to need a safe refuge from the road when that happens. So at the very least there, I would ask that if this is something where there are parts of the secondary plan that have to be dealt with before this can go ahead, that council again defers this and defers all these different outstanding items until they can actually be properly lined up. And we do something with proper planning versus ad hoc. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, I didn't hear any questions there, so we're just going to let those comments lay out there. Any other comments or questions from members of the public, either in person or on Zoom? Thank you all. Are there any questions from members of council? Councillor Rowley?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just ask maybe one or two and then allow my colleagues to ask questions if they have any. I want to go to the traffic study as well. I believe you made mention that we should probably add this concern to the traffic impact study that we're doing, the municipal-wide one. So I just want to add to that for a minute, Mr. Walsh, regarding not only the traffic study that was done, the other studies that were done for OMNI as well. Have they been peer reviewed, and will they be peer reviewed by staff, or will we bring someone in to do that?
To the council, peer review has not been completed. We have reviewed the studies, of course, particularly the manager of infrastructure has had a good review of it. We've had internal discussions about the consequences and conclusions as we see them. And a lot of those matters will be transferred over to a site plan of control design for offsite improvements if approved by council. And it's hearing the comments tonight, it's my intention to also have peer review of the TIS, of the traffic impact study.
Thank you both. I'm going to go to Councillor Wheeldon, who also has a question, and then I'll come back to you. Councillor Wheeldon.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. That was going to be my question as well, Councillor Rowley. With regard to when the studies are peer reviewed, Mr. Walsh, can you explain how this normally happens with a planning application?
Sure. To council, we normally have a list of procured pre-qualified individuals with appropriate engineering specializations in traffic. It's not a generalist matter. It's rather specialist to complete and review a TIS. One consideration of staff throughout this is the fact that Dundas Street is a designated collector road, and Georgina is also a designated collector. So they are intended for higher volumes of traffic and possibly higher speeds. But as we've heard, Georgina is already currently posted at 50. So the long-term plan, perhaps the surface treatments and whatnot, and the profiles aren't fully reflective of it, but long-term plan, as designated in the official plan, is that those roads are collector roads and would function as such. So along collector roads tends to be higher density and higher traffic movements ingressing and egressing from immediately off the site. So that mitigates a lot of the traffic issues there. The pedestrian issues, you see in the staff report under the subtitle Evolving Issues that the pedestrian question is still something that we need to pursue. And there's some thoughts on that, perhaps through an improved Georgina, that there be paved shoulders and trim to full sidewalks, prior to our full reconstruction of Georgina and over the long term, and things like that. So hearing some of the comments, we'll definitely have to pursue that through the site plan control approval. I hope that answered the question sufficiently, but normally we have a roster of peer review specialists and we'll call upon them to do with the peer review, particularly on the TIS.
Thank you both. Councillor Boutwell.
Thank you very much. And through you, Mr. Mayor, may I just ask a quick follow-up on that question before I ask my official question? Director Walsh, you mentioned Collector Road. When we had a conversation several months ago in another meeting, you mentioned that Georgina was an arterial road. Did we not have that? What is the difference between an arterial and a collector road?
I don't recall what words were used, but go ahead and answer the
I have it-
question.
I do have it in my
Director.
notes.
To the mayor and council, I don't think I would have called, unless I misspoke, I don't think I would have described Georgina as a arterial road. Arterial is really a word used to describe a functional classification of highway that's designed to carry traffic in and out of the municipality. So it would be your highway system or your major county roads. So arterial road, I'm not sure what County Road 64 is, might be only a major collector and not up to the higher hierarchy of arterial road. But arterial roads are meant to be a mobility route, moving traffic in and out of the whole municipality, not just within the municipality. And major collectors would be to connect neighborhoods, and collector roads might be for high volumes where the urban core needs to be better access to higher volumes, but yet at lower speeds. And then major locals might connect one development to another. Lastly, the local streets are there purely to access land and make sure development is optimized off those.
Okay, and I just asked for clarification there because we had discussed where County Road 26 connects with the 401.
Right.
So thank you for pointing that. So I did have a couple of questions, but we'll just rotate.
Thank you.
So you mentioned peer review. There are several individuals' bodies that we could go to. Who bears the cost for that peer review? And I ask a lot of these questions for the benefit of those who may be listening and have other questions as well.
Sure, it's a good question. Part of a complete application and when submitted is the signing of an acknowledgement agreement, cost acknowledgement agreement. And there's a trust deposit submitted in the event that we have additional external cost to the typical application. And external cost atypical to the standard application does include peer review. And so it would be the applicant's cost to absorb or address the cost of our peer review.
Thank you both. Councillor Rowley.
Staying with traffic for one more. Looking at the consent application here, one of the conditions, item or letter F, that a financial contribution be received for upgrades to Hardy Lane and Georgina Street. I'm guessing that's what we just discussed a few minutes ago, as far as maybe expanded paved shoulders on Georgina and obviously upgrades to Hardy Lane in order to accommodate all of the traffic. That's what this item F means.
Director.
Through the mayor, yes, that's correct. That because the collector road is needing to be improved and it's not just this development that's the basis for that improvement. They need to make their contribution, but over long term, there are certain collector road standards that the general community would benefit from, and our capital works program would have to respond to that in whatever time frame council ultimately decides to make that investment. So that's why it reads in the form of contributions. And manager of infrastructure, John, going beside me has helped me a lot with some of the information that's been submitted in the final reports here in preparation for tonight as well. If there's anything more you want to add, John, or not to put you on the spot, but yeah.
To the chair is one option is a semi-urban, so you can be looking at just replacing the surface treatment with asphalt and paved shoulders instead of going a full urban with curbs and gutters. So there are options that we can stage that as we fully build out. We do this now, and then when we're as a municipality ready to upgrade and provide additional services, we can do such.
Thank you all. Councillor Wright.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple questions and they're kind of two-parters each. I'm not sure who would answer it specifically. I don't have any personal connections to anyone in an LTC, so I haven't experienced it myself as a lay person. I've heard tonight that there are nurses and PSWs on staff. Are there doctors on staff daily? How are emergencies handled? And are there stats on how often ambulances are called to an LTC to deal with emergencies outside of the scope of staff?
Please.
Thank you. Happy to take that. In addition to nurses and PSWs, there's a lot of management jobs. So we call the administrator or executive director the one that oversees the whole home, but there's directors of care, there's directors of nutrition. Each resident has access to a medical doctor. They're not there 24/7. The ministry is mandated 24/7 RN, so registered nursing care around the clock. And the ministry is also mandating increased care time per resident. So by next year, each one of our residents is mandated to receive 4 hours of direct care per resident day. So that's how we accomplish that through predominantly our registered staff. So when I say registered staff, that's registered nurses being at the highest level of accreditation, then RPNs, and then PSWs. But there's a whole host of what we call our administrative services. So think about departments that are more hoteling type. So dietary, housekeeping, maintenance, laundry, administration, all of those departments also exist in a home too. So there's quite a bit of administration staff that support our residents. And yes, we have emergency vehicles come. It's very different per home. What we're seeing right now is the acuity levels of our residents increasing. The average age of somebody coming into a long-term care is 86, 87 years old. And they're not with us very long, unfortunately, because they often face multiple ailments, whether it's physical or cognitive. So in many cases, the average turnover, what we see a resident with us for, is not longer than 2 years, unfortunately. And that shift is changing too. And we're also seeing seniors exhibit different challenges that were maybe not historically talked about, such as mental health challenges and loneliness. I mean, that the pandemic really exacerbated the need for social interaction. And so a lot of our staffing is around programs and leisure activities and how we can get our residents engaged. And that's a metric we look at as OMNI. How many residents are attending 8 or more programs? And then the last component, which is, not too dissimilar with retirement, is people love food. We want to make sure that they have the best food possible. And we spend a lot of time, we have a corporate resource that's a dietary of culinary resources, as well as external registered dietitians that we work with. Again, we're mandated to have half an hour of dietary care per resident in developing customized menus according to preferences and care needs as well. So there's a lot operationally that happens around the care of a Sorry, I know I rambled. I hope that answers a little bit of it.
I think and then some, but
Yeah.
go ahead as a follow-up. Yeah.
As a follow-up to that, that's all great information. I'm more looking for stats on emergency vehicles when the care of the patient or the client goes outside the scope of the registered nurse that's there. So an ambulance gets called to the scene. Because this is what I'm thinking. For me, the location does feel awkward. And I've had some other citizens come forward questioning how are ambulances going to access the LTC and then take the patients to whichever hospital is deemed that they need to go to. So when you look at the map, they're either going to go north up Georgina, and I'm assuming at relatively high speeds, because ambulances, these are people at the end of life, and you want the best care for them as possible. And if it's my family member, yeah, step on it. I want that kind of care. But it just feels tremendously awkward. So they're either going to go north up Georgina Street or they're going to go east on Smith Street through Smithfield, the quiet hamlet of Smithfield, potentially with, lights blazing and all of that. And then to hit County Road 2 and to get to Trenton. I'm not sure how Belleville would be accessed fully. They're going to go north up Georgina, probably to hit the 401 to go to Coburg, or to hit 30 and go up to Campbellford. Is there any thought, Director Walsh, of extending Georgina through to Highway 2 or County Road 2, I guess it's called now, so throwback.
Director Walsh?
Historically, through the council, to the mayor, to council, historically, there's been discussions of extension of John Street. So that would be essentially Georgina.
Yeah, they all line up.
Down to County Road Highway 2. Yeah.
Would that be looked at as a potential thing for something like this? Because if you're at the LTC Center, if it does land on Georgina, you've got to kind of go around Brighton in this big loop to, if you want to avoid going Smith Street with this community safety zones, because the 40 hits, to get past Smithfield Public School. If you go around through Brighton and to get to County Road 2, you've got the community safety zone with the high school. So it just seems very problematic to me to get people where they need to go in a timely fashion.
Yeah, I think you'll find in the Master Transportation Plan that's coming out that you'll find a plan for the extension of John Street,
North.
connecting, Dundas and Highway 2, and Cannon Road 2. And if they're heading off to the Trent Memorial Hospital, I think they would maybe go down Smith Street, but then turn on Liscar before reaching Smithfield and hit Highway 2 there. They're going to want to get to Highway 2 as soon as possible.
Faster.
Yeah. And again, where I was previously employed with Hastings County, I don't know that there was a lot of ambulance calls to the long-term care home there.
Right.
Because of all the staff and the doctors and nurses that were on staff. What was more common was patient transfer. So no lights, there might be lights, but no siren, and they move along quite slowly, actually.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of the information I was trying to get to.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say it never happens. If an unfortunate incident happens where there's a resident that falls, absolutely there would be EMS called, but predominantly we see resident transfers, and they're typically during the daytime. Thank you.
Councillor Butwell.
Thank you. And this may actually jump on something that you touched on. So traffic volumes the engineering of the roadway of Georgina was looked at as part of the study. We also have, and that would perhaps just be for staff coming and going, deliveries from the 401 corridor. They're going to tuck down around that way. We haven't really touched on the fact that we have on Dundas Street there, we have the high school with an incredibly congested loading area with all the school buses on Dundas. And again, a community safety zone at 40. And then we also have Brighton Public. So the people that are coming through that area or the people that are coming from the LTC, the proposed LTC, I'm just thinking like shift changes, breaks. I mean, one of the most common things you'll see in any of these facilities in the staff area are Tim Hortons cups. So we know that there's going to be multiple, traffic. There's a lot of traffic flow that's going to go south of Hardy Lane on Georgina and whip around through town. It's just there's additional traffic impact beyond Georgina Street as well. And I think that's something that has been missing. Now, I understand because the address is on Georgina, that's where we're looking at, and that's where the proposed driveways are. But we do have additional impact on that very congested, tricky spot to go through, truly at drop off and pick up and on lunch break as everyone's zipping in and out to go across the street to have their cigarettes and stuff that they shouldn't do anyways. So is it in the scope of what we might ask for to assess what kind of impact that type of traffic would have, you know, visitors, EMS? Can our existing EMS service that we have in town and our first responders with our volunteer department, can they handle handle those additional calls? Perhaps not as often as we might have at first expected, but I do know that they operate, I believe there was a stat several years ago that roughly 40 to 50% of their calls are actual medical calls that our fire department is traveling to, because those couple of EMS units are not actually in town. So that actually translates to a larger cost to the municipality as well. So I would think that I'd like to see some sort of impact on what happens with the high school there. Like an extra, say, even if we say there's 100 staff people, say 50% of them run to Tim Hortons or run to Sobeys and do that. What happens during those times of days? Because we don't, I believe, have a sidewalk that takes us up through there either, right?
Almost all the way. Almost all the way. It stops just before my mom's house on Dundas Street.
How did that get there?
That predates my existence on council. That's all I got to say about that.
I was going to say, yeah, there is a sidewalk on the south side of Dundas, just near the frontage of the retained land, and just on the south side of that, just opposite that, where it terminates there. So we'll coordinate a pedestrian access route from that point. And on the matter of the interaction of the long-term care home to a shopping destination, I'll call it either Main Street or Tim Hortons, there may be, I suspect, with that number of staff, there's going to be some food offerings on premise. So I'm not sure how much during, you know, breaks and things that people will be necessitating the movement to Tim Hortons. But again, with the long-term plan to have a John Street extension, when it comes to bear, then that will be a more direct route, of course. And but we also have, I think, automatic speed enforcement by then too. So I think that will have a natural impact on mitigating any otherwise hazardous traffic movement.
Am I allowed to say something?
Not at this stage, Dr. Larmer, but I can circle back to you.
No problem.
Councillor Betwell.
Thank you again, and through you to the director. So you said the magic words, automatic speed enforcement units. So this area, with being a long-term care, would be easy to establish as a community safety zone. So we could just pop some cameras up pointing at the top of that hill. And I will say, I have visited the site. I spent an hour to 2 hours there, kind of walking up and down the road, having a look. The people do fly coming south off that road. And it's narrow. It's a narrow road, softer shoulders. And I don't recall, is it single surface there? Is it chip tar?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
chip
it's tar and
tar.
chip. Yeah,
It's tar and chip.
tar and
So,
chip down to Hardy Lane, and then it's asphalt.
and then it's, okay.
From Hardy Lane to Dundas, give or take, right around.
So, and then just swinging off to some, we may have to look at additional engineering there, because the amount of construction vehicles that are going to come through, we're probably going to make short repair of that existing road.
Yes, that's correct. We take an assessment of existing conditions prior to construction starting, and there'll be revisions in any agreement about construction routes and about any impacts on existing roadways. Yeah, so that is examined, yes. And in terms of community safety zones, we don't have a policy framework as to what would constitute a community safety zone and what would not. But we should have something in place to give us that direction.
I'll come back to you if that's okay, Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm just going to kind of give a bit of personal experience, because over the last 4 or 5 years, I have personally had to deal with long-term care homes with two of my family members. And certainly know firsthand that this is definitely a requirement for not only our community, but the area. And we do not have enough beds. And that's not to say that I am 100% for this, but I know exactly that we do not have enough beds for this. And certainly not enough beds in our local area as far as having to travel to other communities to see loved ones is not an easy thing. I want to bring up a little bit the idea of the emergency. I would guess, Councillor Butwell, that if you spoke with the fire department of all of the extra medical assists that they do, very few of them would come from the long-term care home here. I think most of them are from homebound residents in town, having been in these places many, many times for the last 5 years. So I'm kind of glad to see this coming around to a degree. I do have some concerns as well. One question that I do have, you brought up an example from the new build in Long Sault, which is, I believe, 128 beds on a single story. I was wondering why you would not just have considered a two-story to do the 256 beds. If you could explain that to me, please.
Absolutely. That was a unique project where we retrofitted the existing home and added an expansion there. So it was not a typical greenfield project like this is. As you know, our current Maplewood site wouldn't facilitate an expansion. It's pretty landlocked. In Long Sault, we had the benefit of having some additional land. So all we had to do is retrofit the existing spaces and add on a couple of home areas. And so that was a little bit of a simpler project. We are building in Napanee right now, which is 3 stories as well for 128 beds. Again, that is simply because of the license allocation where the ministry looks at where the beds are needed. And to your point, there's a significant shortfall of beds here. And this is why between the ministry, between OMNI, we've engaged Cushman and Wakefield to do a feasibility study to understand the demand for this. And we know there's a lot of demand, but also the availability of staffing. We want to make sure that the staff are local to the community. We have an existing home. Once this home if the proposed home gets built, then those staff members would come along and join the new location here. It's only 5 minutes away, but we would need a lot more staff because, like I said, that's only a 49-bed home. So we would have to expand the staffing complement. But in that particular case, it was a retrofit versus a greenfield.
Thank you both. Councillor Wheeldon.
Thank you, Mayor. I was wondering if I could ask OMNI, how long do they expect this building to be in operation? We're talking about closing some existing homes. What's the lifespan of one of these facilities?
Sir?
Thank you. OMNI has never built and sold a home. We operate for the long term. The license we would get from the Ministry of Long-Term Care is 30 years. Although we know these homes will last a lot longer than that. Prior to, I believe it was at some point in the 2000s, the ministry introduced license terms. But we very much operate this as if it was in perpetuity. But the license itself would last for 30 years.
Okay. Following up on that, if I may. Since you're in it for the long term, I expect that you are building for the long term and that this will be a long-standing structure. What sustainability features are you building into this? Is this going to be a net zero building?
We don't formally get LEED certified just given the cost of it, but we do build in a lot of energy efficiencies that would, if we were to get certified and not, have the cost of doing that, I think we would check off many of those boxes. In terms of high energy efficiency, each RHA is almost its own pod with ventilation, mechanical. Again, I'm not a developer, so excuse my lack of technical here. But absolutely, we're in it for the long term, and we're building beyond the minimum standard. So beyond the minimum standard from the Long-Term Care Act, and beyond the minimum standards from any CBSA, Tara, correct me if I got that terminology right or wrong, but any of the CBSA requirements, we build above and beyond that. Because we look at what we call total cost of ownership. It'd be great to build a cheap building and sell it. We're not doing that. We're operating this for the long term. So we look at our R&M costs, our repairs and maintenance costs over over the long term, over the 30-year process. So one of the things we're doing, as an example, is that the generator would service the whole building instead of just specific parts of the building as required by the long-term care. We want to make sure that there's absolutely no disruption in the event of a power outage. So that's just one small example of how we are going above and beyond.
Thank you. I would love it if you could find what the equivalency is. I know the certification is egregiously expensive, and so if you could find out what the equivalency of your build would be and communicate that through Director Walsh, that would be really awesome.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you both. Councillor Wright, did you have another question? Thank you for that. Councillor Botwell.
Don't go away.
Oh.
Get your steps in.
Still in the hot seat.
No, not a hot seat question. Through you, Mr. Mayor. So some of these beds would be replacing the Maplewood
Yes.
beds. Is the expectation that the residents of Maplewood can expect to pay the same costs at the new facility?
Yes, we don't mandate pricing. That's all through the Ministry of Long-Term Care. We do not set pricing. It's a per diem that we don't control. So there's again, this is not a money generator for us. Like, long-term care is a very thin margin business. If we want to get into the economics of this is simply it's more of a going concern.
And the reason that I ask is because in this community, I know that Maplewood is one of those places that is, much beloved. It's been part of the community for a long time.
Absolutely.
And I would really like to see, no matter what you build, where you build, to be able to at least absorb Brighton residents in that way.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I wouldn't want to see it become a place that the residents of this community had to somehow compete to get into.
No, even with our feasibility study, the catchment area we looked at was Brighton only, not beyond that. If we were even looking beyond that in terms of staff, and we're comfortable that our staff would all come from Brighton as well. So absolutely, those residents, those staff members, they would all be part of this. And we've engaged with those staff members. We've engaged, they've seen some of our new homes. We just opened a new home in Norwood, Ontario in September. Feels like forever ago, but in September. And the excitement the staff members had, oh my gosh, I have a proper break room, a proper staff room. You're right, it's full of Tim Hortons cups. But they're genuinely excited about that. And they want to see this development happen. And they want to see that for their residents, because they are attached to their residents. And they want to see them in new spaces. So
I'm going to follow up on this. How does placement in long-term care work? It's always been my understanding that it's through the access, was it called the access? It used to be called the Access Center. I don't know.
ECAC's,
Yeah.
well, LIN's, it's now called Ontario Health at Home.
it is.
It's
Thank
probably their third rebranding, but essentially you go on a list. A resident would put their top 3 choices. Again, there's not a lot of choice here. And this is why we're trying to increase capacity. And then if a space comes up, then that resident will get a call. They can deny that space or accept that space, but it's really done through a central agency. So OMNI has no control over who we take, what we charge. We have no control over any of that.
That's all dealt with through Ontario Health.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you for that. Councillor Botwell has a follow-up. See that? You bet I will. Councillor Rowley.
Thank you. And yes, you are correct. It's a big plan to get people in these places. And yes, it is affordable, I should say. It is not,
Yes.
It's not like living in a retirement home, I can tell you. And having dealt with people who have been living with a very low income, it's government subsidized as well. But let's move on from that. I would like to know what your plan is with part 1 of the property. Part 2 is what you're severing to build the home on, correct?
That's right.
What's your plan with part 1?
So part 1 would be retained by the existing owner and developer. And
Oh, that's not your property?
no, that's not our property.
Okay, Stephen, I'll just leave that alone for now then.
Yes.
Thank you both. That was easier than I thought it would be. Councillor Wheeldon.
Thank you. I just want to address a few of the comments about the framing of this question as to whether this is in service of a developer or in service of a long-term care corporation or in service of the people of Brighton. And obviously it's not an either or. And some of the framing tonight has suggested that it is. I'm thinking about this from the perspective of, what is Brighton going to look like 50 years from now? That's why I'm asking about the long-term sustainability of the facility. I'm thinking about this in terms of how long can we delay expanding our urban boundaries again by building at higher density now? I'm looking at how can we get more affordable units for residents today? How can we get more jobs in our community today? How can we have the best possible impact on the most possible people? And I just want to be clear that I'm absolutely considering the impacts that will happen to people in the community, but it's not just people who live on Georgina Street who will be impacted by this. And I'm very sympathetic to the process of going through change. It's always a challenge. And I've spoken with a few of the residents from Georgina Street in the last few days, and I hear those concerns. I truly do. I want to be clear that saying, if I were to say yes tonight to a rezoning, first of all, this is only the first step among many. This is not the last time council will have to say yes to this project before it's built. But secondly, it will not be because I'm in favor of OMNI in particular or any corporate interests at all. I'll be frank, I would prefer if it were a not-for-profit long-term care home. That's where my sympathies lie. And there's been a lot of discussion about who did better during the pandemic, et cetera. I'm sure there was a lot of lessons learned, and I know that you're doing better now than you were before. So fantastic. But this is not a question of how can we be equally fair to everyone, because we can't. Some developments will always impact the people around them more than they will impact people on the other side of town. I don't live right next door to this one, and so it impacts me less in a negative way. But I'm also not going to work in this home, and so it impacts me less in a positive way. But thinking about the most impact or the most positive impact, the most good that we can do, is where I'm trying to approach this from. And so I just wanted to be clear about that, because some of the framing suggested that we might be doing something untoward by considering this.
Can I add to that?
I don't think he asked a question,
Oh,
so
okay.
I'm going to just let that fly. Thank you. Councilor Butwell, did you have another? All right, well, we'll see where those go.
And actually, two of those questions, perhaps you could answer.
Sure.
So, and through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Regarding the additional absorption of that 10 meters along the north edge of the property, did that actually affect the footprint of the building itself?
Not so much the building, but we had parking on the left-hand side, so we kind of moved it to the top of the site plan.
Okay. So we have 200, what was it, 256 homes?
Beds, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I heard it coming from, yep. If you could build larger, would you?
That's a good question, perhaps, but there's a point where you lose efficiencies and scale and having that home feel. There are homes in the province that are 320 beds, kind of back to back as well, so you can have 640 beds. So yeah, absolutely. I think the ministry would love us to do all that, but again, we're cognizant of one, what's the need here, and not overbuilding, but also not losing that home feel. Our homes, we don't operate in downtown Toronto or the urban markets. We are in communities that feel a lot like Brighton. Our closest one to the GTA is actually in Aurora. We have a small home called the Willows Estates there. But again, once we redevelop that home, that'll move to Lindsay as well. So we want to blend in with the community. So no, we've had opportunities to build bigger, and we don't feel like that's the right thing to do, because you lose some of that home feel and that personal touch for resident care.
So with 256 homes, how much smaller could you build and still keep your business case?
That is, I mean, it's not necessarily operating, it's the building, because we don't internally build. We have two team members that are our development team internally, but we don't make any money off the development of this at all. This is purely so that we can operate for 30 years, like I said, at a very minimum. We hire consultants. We have a general contractor that's our prime consultant as well. We are simply the team members on our team are simply owner's rep. They do a great job. They make sure that we're on budget, on schedule, things are moving along. The trades are on site, things of that nature. So we don't make any money off that. But from a development cost perspective, this is in around the sweet spot.
The sweet spot.
Yeah.
So and how was this location selected by yourselves?
So this, in full disclosure, my predecessor, Patrick McCarthy, was a big player in this, and he identified this location. I understand from him, we looked at a few different sites. This was the most viable in terms of land. I mean, we're not developers, so if we can go into every market that we're building and find a nice 4-acre square parcel of land, that's as sophisticated as I get. And that was really the criteria of it. And you know, and speaking with Director Walsh for a couple of years now on the viability of this site. So again, there's not a lot of land options here too. And that's not too dissimilar than any of the other markets we're into.
I really was going to ask this question of Director Walsh, but perhaps you might have some input in it as well. So in the very early presentation that you did, you mentioned that when we are looking at increasing the density to the amount that we're looking at doing so here, you generally want to have a graduation of density from low density, medium, high density. I don't know if this technically hits the targets for high density. Perhaps it does. I know for Brighton it would be likely. So it would seem, just from, you know, the average person, we have single family homes all around it. And then we're going to big structure, a lot of homes, a lot of traffic. It doesn't seem to me like it really fits in that particular location. The height of it, the sheer volume of humans that are there. We go from rural type single family homes to something that is very urban. It's a very urban type of thing. So I have concerns around that. And I suppose I was going to ask Director Walsh, if you could address that, where we go from low density to big building.
Sure. So in terms of, it's not expressed in terms of density, our official plan does, but say in more modern growth management terms, it comes down to jobs and persons per hectare or net hectare. And I haven't done that exact translation. But in this case, we have the intersection of two collector roads, as we've discussed, Dundas and Georgina. And that's where you do want your higher density and your higher concentrations of jobs and people to be present. So, you know, so that's the, you know, in terms of transportation and transition and graduation of density, that's a good location.
Thank you. And as a follow-up, so I understand that when we talk about them being collector roads, major collector roads, the reality is they're not. What kind of timeline are we talking about to where we get to a, I'm trying to think of an equivalent, like a Second Dug Hill Road and Highway 2. We have two collector roads there. I can see a development, us looking at that and going, well, this completely makes sense. But we have a rural road that connects Brighton and Smithfield. It connects single family homes to single family homes. And we have Georgina that has a total of 5 houses perhaps on it. So we're not really talking about collectors in the current day. When are they going to be acting as collectors? When are we going to see those volumes on those roads?
Yeah, I would have to defer to the master transportation plan for that answer, but that is the designation and that is the plan. And that's what we have to work with. When the timing comes, I can't exactly forecast that. It will be up to council to decide when to make that expenditure.
And population growth, really. It will be driven by the market at the end of the day, which most of these things are. Any other questions from members of council? I can go to Dr. Larmer and come back. How's that sound? And normally we would have ended the whole public session. I do like to make sure that the public has a fulsome opportunity in these statutory public meetings to express themselves. So, Dr. Larmer.
That's okay. It's I'll be short, actually. I'm not going to ask the 15 things that I have on my list because I realize it doesn't matter, to be honest, at this point. Just hearing how pro Director Walsh is, it almost sounds like he works for Omni Group. But anyways, I do have a question about sanitary capacity in the township or the municipality. When this thing gets going for, like, first of all, do we have sanitary capacity that'll allow this to move forward? And if it does, and if we do, the timeline is aggressive. If it's, you know, if we're looking for shovel in ground next year, does this displace current developers in the area? Like, does the sanitary capacity get ahead of other, like, because it's becoming more of a priority to help the provincial mandate to add upgraded and more long-term care beds? Does this one go in front of people, or how does it work? Like, I know there's lots of stuff going on with sanitary capacity in town, so I'm just curious how this fits in.
That's a really good question, Dr. Larmer. Thank you for that. And I'll turn the specifics over to Director Walsh for that. But council did pass a policy whereby each development has to be approved for sanitary capacity as we run up against our capacity concerns. But Director Walsh.
Thank you, Mayor, to council. In response to the question, the staff did do a residual capacity calculation recently using the Ministry of Environment, Conservation, Parks formula in its guidelines. And we are at about the 80% of the residual capacity. Within that residual capacity is the actual hydraulic flow now on average that we're using, which is about 60%. About 20% of that is between that 60 and 80% is actual allocation to developments. So what we call that is committed capacity. And part of that committed capacity did account for the prospect of 254 long-term beds. As we tried to report to the province in our grant application, what kind of limits we had on our infrastructure and why we needed the grant.
Thank you for that. So I think that answers the question. You said 254. Was it 256?
Yeah, that's okay. I get it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, appreciate that. Any other questions from members of council? Councillor Rowley.
Thank you. And I know tonight all we're really doing is deciding on whether or not to pass the bylaw for the zoning changes, correct? And the site plan and all of this building stuff will come at some other point. So there's still opportunity for neighbors and the community to reach out to, or have Omni reach out to the neighbors and the community. As far as I want to just talk a little bit about the facade. And I know that you've said your engineers, consultants, whatever, have worked really hard on putting together the picture of what this place will look like. But if there were a few changes that needed to be made in order to blend it a little bit more into what is there in the neighborhood, would Omni be open to that?
Absolutely. The short of it is absolutely, and we would even welcome a session with our neighbors, with James, with Mr. Dake, so that everyone can have equal representation. I'm happy to set up a meeting. I'm not the best at picking facades, but we have a development team and architects and a number of folks who have done this repeatedly, and would welcome a session where we can gather the stakeholders here and make sure that it's everyone's vested in this. I mean, we looked at Brighton, but if there's something we need to switch, or a color scheme, or different facade, or there's a lot that goes into it. And I mean, Tara tried to explain this to me, and you know, it's information overload. But even the canopy and the overhang when you drop residents off, I mean, there's 6 different designs there that we looked at. So we're absolutely open to all of that.
Thank you both. Anyone else? Follow up?
I'd like to make a comment on that
Go
then.
ahead.
Then I would hope that those in the community that have concerns and the neighbors, Dr. Larmer and Richard, and those others who still have showed some concerns, that you would take OMNI up on this opportunity to sit with them and see if you can come up with something that would be pleasing to everyone.
Councillor Botwell.
Thank you, because I feel that a vote on this is impending. So I just wanted to say a couple things. We talked about, somebody referenced that they're not a realtor. I am a realtor. So I think that in terms of how it will impact existing neighbors is significant in terms of value of their homes. We only have to look at the New Brighton Retirement Living, which is smaller footprint, but similar size height-wise.
Right.
The properties adjoining it that were built are nowhere near the caliber or the desirability, I'll call it, as the ones one street over. Many of them are rentals. It's changed that neighborhood. I've been in several of them, and those are going to be hard resales. It will impact the existing homes in this property or surrounding it. I suspect that the homes that will be built behind it are not going to be the single family nice homes. I think they'll probably end up being the townhouses. So I just wanted to say that. And I think it's also important because Councillor Rowley touched on it as well, that yes, this is a process. There are multiple stages of it. I think that as this council has learned, sometimes just pushing the puck forward means that we are pushing it further forward than we think we are. Because when things come back to us, they sometimes feel like they've happened already. So I am concerned that in deferring, in saying like the residents can meet, you know, the different various stakeholders, and I hate using that word, residents, interested folk, could meet with you later down the pipe. I don't actually think it's going to end up producing any real resolution. I mean, the look of the property, at the end of the day, it's probably going to look quite nice, no matter what finishes you chose. I see the finishes that you use. They don't offend me in the least. Are they in keeping with the homes that were built in the 1970s? No, but that's okay. Brighton's a bit of a mishmash anyways. But I just would say that if we're making a decision tonight to change that zoning, this is the project that we're getting. It will largely look the same, I'm thinking. It will largely be comprised with the same number of units. It will be essentially the same height that's being proposed today. I know at the last meeting that we had, we did talk about the height, and I didn't see anything come back that addressed that height. There was a couple of meters difference, but a couple of meters when you're talking at that height is negligible. So I do have concerns with moving this forward and rezoning this property, because I think what we're doing is we're rubber stamping it to just move along. That's what I have to say.
Councillor Ray.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, going back to the height of the building, it's 256 beds, 128 per floor. Why is there 5 floors instead of?
64 per floor.
Oh, 64 per floor.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I had that wrong.
Yeah. So each one of those wings would be 16 beds. So 16, that's
Got
a
it.
32-bed home area. And then you have the 32-bed home area, which are the other 2 forks of it.
Go ahead.
Thank you again. And just for clarification, I actually think that it's absolutely a needed service. Here in Brighton especially, but throughout the entire region, our tri-counties, I call them. I really struggle with this particular structure on this particular piece of land in this particular location. I really do. I envision this being a Highway 2 project, where it's closer to the additional services that the residents might like if their family comes to visit, where their family might like to go. Easier for transportation. So I like your project in terms of what you're offering. I just don't think I like this location. So, thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other comments from council? Councillor Wheeldon, thank you.
Thank you. I get that. And it seems like whenever any project comes up, I can always think of a better place for it. The question becomes, is the land in that better place for sale? And are the owners of it willing to build something like this? Unfortunately, we're in the position of giving assent to what people want to do with their land, rather than picking where the best place for everything would be. And I want to pick the best place for everything, but that's not my role, unfortunately.
Hi, I just want to chime in. I'm Tara Crawford from the construction development side of OMNI. I apologize, I'm not on camera. I have a little bit of a flu bug. So I just wanted to chime in on 2 comments. Number one was the design of the building. We did a lot of research about recently is being built in Brighton, and we compared it to new condos downtown. You're redeveloping, you're restoring your older buildings, and we've developed our concepts based on that. That's my comment on that. I feel that we have met that. With respects to where we're developing, I honestly feel for residents and seniors in the community, whether it be locals, volunteers, we're close to downtown. I think it brings a very good culture for the residents living in the building. I think it brings a good community to bring volunteers to the building, and those are my 2 cents.
Thank you, Ms. Crawford. Appreciate your comments. Are there any other comments from members of council? I do have a couple of comments before I ask for final comments. So I'm going to work this a little bit backwards because of the comments you made, Ms. Crawford. As most folks in this room know, I grew up, well, we moved into a home a short nine iron away from this lot in 1978 when I was about 7 years old. And I walked to Brighton Public School when my mom wouldn't give me a drive because, you know, that's how it worked. And I walked to the high school when I went to high school when my friend wouldn't pick me up. So that was before there was a sidewalk on Dundas Street, but not long before a sidewalk appeared.
Uphill both ways.
I'm not that old. So I will say that the design to me, and I mean no disrespect to building designers, I'm not one. The design to me looks like a build that would happen on our main corridor. Is in a very small neighborhood, abutting an extremely rural area. I know it's in the built boundary, but it's still a very rural area in our community. So I would ask that OMNI's team please have consideration for that as you move this forward, assuming of course that it goes forward. I'm pleased to note staff's interest in community safety zones. I think this would make a good one, might make a good one today, but certainly would make a good one as we move this project forward, should that happen, and certainly after it opens up. We're going to see some significant, again, assuming it moves forward, we're going to see some significant traffic volumes, and it would make sense, I think, for a community safety zone in this neighborhood. Given that Dundas Street is a 40-kilometer-an-hour zone all the way to Georgina Street before it turns into 60 on the way into Smithfield. From a sidewalk perspective, I look to staff to continue those discussions. I would want the sidewalk network from Dundas Street to extend up to Georgina and then on to Georgina so that folks can walk either the residents who are able to and choose to, or employees who choose to get there that way, or visitors at the end of the day. So I would look to staff and the developer to wrap their heads around that if they're able to. I believe Councillor Butwell's quite right. Although this is a rezoning application, we know that site plan control now rests with staff. I don't know how many more times we would see this come back at this stage. I think we're still, this is a condition of severance.
The mayor, the council, the bylaw for site plan control was passed in 2012. So there's a standing site plan control bylaw, and it applies automatically to anything zoned R3. And just for clarity, that was a separate provision put in the draft zoning bylaw as well, that this development is subject to site plan control.
And the province looked to us to delegate a lot of site plan control over to staff anyway.
Correct. Bill 123 made it mandatory to delegate site plan control to staff. So council delegated site plan control to the development review team. So it's a full team that would be reviewing and commenting before the director signs off on the plan.
Thank you for that. So again, if this were to move forward, I would look to staff to ensure that there was an appropriate construction entrance and that those construction entrances didn't impact the rural portion of Georgina Street more than they needed to. I understand that will impact the folks who live on Dundas and the south portion of Georgina while construction is underway. But at the end of the day, from an infrastructure perspective, we're better off making sure that truck traffic runs on Dundas and the lower part of Georgina, not on that rural portion. By way of information, if I got in my car at the Brighton Fire Department and drove to the current Maplewood facility, Google Maps tells me it takes 3 minutes. And if I got into my car at the Brighton Fire Department and drove to this location, Google Maps tells me it takes 3 minutes. So from an emergency services perspective, I think we're really well covered. Both our ambulance and fire department are located right here. And I think even if that gets redeveloped, we're likely to see it in the same location, especially given the expense we went to buy land from the school board for that purpose. I will also note that the County of Northumberland, I should say, the province of Ontario has mandated that all ambulance services move to a new call-out system. Northumberland County is scheduled to embrace that system. I believe it's in March of 2025. It's coming up. And that is expected to reduce our fire department's medical assist calls, just because they will be more data-based in terms of when the ambulance leaves and at what rate of speed they go. Given how we place residents in long-term care, I do know that many Brighton residents have had to accept service in places as far away as Bancroft. And a place with 256 beds in Brighton would help eliminate the driving of family that far away in order to see their loved ones. Do I think this is the perfect location for this? I do not. I just don't. But quite right, to Councillor Wielden's point, developments happen where willing buyers and willing sellers come together to propose developments. And at the end of the day, that's what we're asked to wrestle with tonight, is not whether this is the perfect location, but whether we can wrap our minds around a long-term care facility in Brighton at this location. So I've heard that this is a 3-story building, and I've heard that this is a 4-story building, and I've heard that this is a 5-story building tonight. And I would like to know, how many stories is this building? At 18 meters, I believe, is the number, but how many stories are we talking about?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So good question. So it is 4 stories, and it will have a 5th story at the rear, which is what I referred to as the walkout basement, given the grade change. So 5 floors in total, one of which is effectively the walkout at the rear.
Got it. Thank you very much for that explanation. So I understand the confusion now. At least has been wringing their hands about expanding the existing site, moving to a new site for probably 6 years, pre-pandemic for sure. And I also know that this site has been noodling around for well, maybe 4 years now or so, maybe a little longer. I also know that I have asked and pushed and poked our MPP to find out whether the funding is going to happen for an expanded LTC in the municipality. My want was to make sure that if there was an expanded long-term care facility, it happened in Brighton. That's not to say I don't care where it happens in Brighton, I do, but the priority, I think, for me and our municipality with our aging population is to have this facility here. And so I will at least thank the landowners and the developers, the corporation, for having the insight and foresight to help make something happen in the municipality of Brighton. Moving from a 49-bed facility to a 256-bed facility is huge, but necessary and needed at the end of the day. So I think that's really all I have to say. Not too many questions, just comments. And so I will ask members of council, are there any other questions or comments before I turn it over to Mr. Warren? Mr. Warren, do you have any final comments? One would think.
I just have maybe a few summary comments. Staff really do appreciate, above everything else, the time and effort taken by individuals to prepare such thorough and well-articulated comments. It's very rare that you get that in a planning application, and it's quite nice to see. I'll say that the lands have been planned for an urban level of land use intensification on municipal services for several years. That we are looking at a location on a collector road, which is widely considered ideal for greater density and massing. Even if this application didn't come forward, whatever one that we did get forward, we would be looking for greater density and massing adjacent to collector roads, as we will be everywhere in the municipality. There's a clear trend in planning legislation, and the new PPS is looking for housing intensification opportunities everywhere. Been well noted that through several times that it's going to site plan approval. It is a staff delegated authority. At this point, there is a development review team. That's sort of the fine-tooth comb of development review. We look at many detailed aspects. Many of them have been actually mentioned here tonight. Various off-site and infrastructure improvements, from water main, road improvements to Hardy Street, Georgina Street, as well as standard site plan details that deal with traffic flow, construction access, parking, landscaping, refuse management, lighting, rooftop mechanical screening, and pedestrian access. Those things will all be part of the final site plan approval and signed and sealed with a development agreement should it go through, should it be approved by council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. And I do have a motion before me to read. Before I read that motion, we've been at this for 2.5 hours. I could use a drink of water, so I'm going to take a 5-minute recess before I read this very long motion. Councillor Butwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. May I ask a question of Manager Warren very quickly?
You may.
So I hear what you're saying, that these concerns would be addressed through the development committee. What was it?
Development review team?
Development
Yeah.
review team.
Basically
So,
looks at site plans.
so you are hearing the concerns that are around this table and in this room. Are you at all going to be looking at height of that building being 4.5 stories? Is that something that will be addressed by that team?
Well, it'd be addressed tonight because it's in the zoning bylaw that's to be passed tonight.
Okay.
It mentions the 18 meters.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else before I take a recess? So it's 9:01. We'll reconvene at 9:06. It's 9:07. I'll call this meeting back to order with thanks for everyone's indulgence. The motion is moved by Council Rowley and seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson that Council receive the staff report dated November 12, 2024 regarding the subject application on Georgina Street being zoning bylaw amendment application file number Z07 2024. And further that Council enacts a bylaw to rezone the subject lands from the special agricultural zone to a special urban residential zone, as well as special agricultural zone with a holding provision as detailed in this staff report. And further that Council grants provisional consent to application B08 2024, subject to the following conditions. Each condition shall be fulfilled no later than 2 years from the date of the mailing. At the applicant's cost, sufficient land be conveyed by registered transfer to the Municipality of Brighton along the frontage for widening of the road allowance to a minimum of 13 meters from the center line along Georgina Street, inclusive of any associated traveled areas, shoulders, or drainage works. At the applicant's cost, sufficient land be conveyed by registered transfer to the Municipality of Brighton to establish visibility triangles at the southeastern and northeastern parts of the subject lands of 9 meters by 9 meters as required by the municipal engineer from the existing corner property bars. At the applicant's cost, sufficient land to the extent of 20 meters in width plus site triangles along the northerly boundary of the consented lot to be conveyed by registered transfer to the Municipality of Brighton to form part of a future internal roadway. The conveyances referenced in conditions C, D, and E above shall be clear of any liens or encumbrances, all to the satisfaction of the manager of operations. That a financial contribution be received for upgrades to Hardy Lane and Georgina Street from the entirety of the frontage of the development to Dundas Street to an urban cross-section to the satisfaction of the Director of Planning and Development. That cash in lieu of parkland be paid to the municipality in compliance with Municipal Bylaw 110-2023, parkland and open space dedication, an amount equal to 5% of the appraised value of the subject lands. That all taxes on each of the lots be paid up to date prior to the issuance of a certificate of official. A digital copy of a registrable survey for the lots and the appropriate deed transfer be prepared and deposited with the municipal clerk. The surveyor deposit with the municipality a geospatial data file of the surveyed parcel fabric with respect to the severed and retained lands submitted to the satisfaction of the municipality. And the owner provides to the municipality a registrable description on a deed conveying the severed lands for use for the issuance of a certificate of official for consent. Is there any discussion? Councillor Rowley.
I'll just start with one thing. I had asked a question earlier, and I think a lot of it was asked regarding the traffic. Will all the studies be peer reviewed now? That since we've asked for that.
Director Walsh.
Yes, in particular TIS, some of those studies like that, we'll be asking for materiality of exterior, et cetera, as per the discussions here tonight. For example, that won't need peer review. So it'll be a smattering of peer review for the hardcore technical stuff and less, and other, we won't need peer review for other matters.
Just to clarify then, those peer reviews will not affect changing this later on. Like to say, peer reviews have nothing to do with what we're discussing here now. Just want to make sure.
At this stage, the peer review would affect assuming we pass this, if we pass this motion, the peer review would have effect on the site plan control.
That's correct. Yeah. Yep.
Thank you both. Is there anything further? All those, Councillor Wheeldon.
Thank you. I was going to ask the same question. So if the peer review comes back and says that, for example, the traffic study was bogus, what happens then?
Director Walsh.
The traffic study will probably relate to what improvements are needed on the road in terms of intersections and shoulders. It's going to speak to those sorts of things. I've also made a note as a result of this evening to have the peer review take a look at the parking on site as well. That was a question that came up. But being that the roads are planned for collector roads, it won't tip that threshold. In my opinion, that won't be necessitated.
Thank you. Councillor Butwell?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. So just for clarification, if there are recommendations and there are costs associated with those recommendations, who will pay for those?
Director Walsh?
Through the mayor to council, it would be the applicant's cost, and they've signed an agreement to that effect.
Thank you both. Anything else from members of council? All those in favor?
Recorded vote, please.
You may. Madam Clerk, Councillor Rowley has requested a recorded vote.
Councillor Emily Rowley,
Yes.
Councillor Jeff Wielden,
Yes.
Councillor Bobby Wright,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Ron Anderson,
Yes.
Councillor Ann Butwell,
No.
Mayor Brian Ostrander.
Yes.
That's carried.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And that ends our statutory public meeting with a motion moved by Councillor Butwell, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson, that council move out of the statutory public meeting November 12th, 2024 at 9:14 p.m. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. That moves us into planning and development reports. First report is with regard to part lot control exemption application for Applewood Meadows. Mr. Warren, we've read your report. Do you have anything to add or highlight, sir?
Nothing further at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a motion moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Councillor Rowley, that council receives a staff report regarding an application for part lot control exemption as submitted by 8597685 Canada Incorporated pertaining to Block 18, Plan 39M 961. That council proceed to enact a bylaw to designate certain lands specifically described as Block 18, Plan 39M-961, not subject to part lot control. That council instruct the municipal solicitor to register the part lot control bylaw as enacted and to prepare a transfer easement as applicable to parts 1 to 18 shown on draft 39R 14908 prior to registration of the part lot control bylaw. And the council resolves to receive and approve the reference plans 39R-14908 for lands as being exempt from part lot control as illustrated and otherwise attached to this report. Is there any discussion? Those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion is carried. Next report is with regard to a street name list. Manager Warren, we've read your report. Do you have anything to add or highlight?
Nothing further at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a motion moved by Councillor Butwell, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson. The council received the subject staff report. That council directs staff to undertake a 60-day public consultation period regarding the establishment of a list for the naming of new streets in the municipality, and the council directs staff to report back to council following the public consultation period with a policy for establishing a list for the naming of new streets in the municipality. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? There being none opposed, that motion is carried. That brings us to items for information purposes. The first is the Northumberland Next County Official Plan Amendment, moved by Councillor Rowley, seconded by Councillor Wright. The council received the Northumberland County Staff Report 2024-131, Northumberland Next County Official Plan, what we heard for information. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. And the Ontario Land Tribunal, file OLT 24-000093, with regard to the Williams Enterprises decision. It's moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Councillor Rowley, that the Ontario Land Tribunal file number OLT 24000093 decision JRB Williams Enterprises Inc. Z13 2022 be received for information, and that the mayor and the clerk execute the bylaw pursuant to the Ontario Land Tribunal order decision of October 18th, 2024. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Are there any opposed? The motion is carried. We have nothing listed under unfinished business. That brings us to bylaws. The first is the part lot control bylaw for Applewood Meadows. It's moved by Councillor Butwell, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson, that council gives a bylaw its first, second, and third reading and finally passes on this date. Being a bylaw under the provisions of Section 50, Sub 5 of the Planning Act, RSO 1990, Chapter P13, as amended, designating certain lands situated in the municipality of Brighton, specifically described as Block 18, Plan 39M-961, not subject to part lot control. Is there any discussion? All in favor? There being none opposed, that motion is carried. The next bylaw is zoning bylaw amendment for OMNI Z07 2024. It's moved by Councillor Rowley, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson. The council gives a bylaw its first, second, and third reading and finally passes on this date, being a bylaw under the provisions of Section 34 of the Planning Act, RSO 1990, to amend bylaw number 140, 2002, as otherwise amended, of the Corporation of the Municipality of Brighton, as it applies to the lands located located at or on, but not both. On part lot 33, concession A, now part 139R-13901, Municipality of Brighton. Is there any discussion?
Recorded vote, please.
Thank you. Is there any discussion before I ask for the recorded vote? Madam Clerk, Councillor Rowley has requested a recorded vote.
Councillor Emily Rowley,
Yes.
Councillor Jeff Wielden,
Yes.
Councillor Bobby Wright,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Ron Anderson,
Yes.
Councillor Ann Butwell,
No.
Mayor Brian Ostrander,
Yes.
and that is carried.
All right, that brings us to question period. If there is anyone, there's no one on Zoom. If there's anyone in the gallery that has a question with anything that was on tonight's agenda, please step forward to the microphone. There's none noted. So we will now read a motion to proceed into closed session. Should council choose to proceed into closed session with the passage of this motion, do we need another recess? We'll just carry on. Okay. We will end the live YouTube stream and we will not return to the live YouTube stream for the duration of this meeting. I have a motion moved by Councillor Rowley, seconded by Councillor Wright. The council resolve itself into closed session November 12th, 2024 at 9:20 p.m. Pursuant to the Ontario Municipal Act, RSO 2001, as amended, subsection 239(2)B, personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, and two bylaw enforcement matters, and C, a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipal or local board, a new housing initiative. Is there any discussion? All in favor? There being none opposed, that motion is carried.